helping to moderate tonight's session, and my role is to ensure everyone's participation, experience, and help keep us on time. I'm going to start off by just sharing a little bit more about the purpose of the meeting tonight, our agenda, and how we plan to run the meeting. And Brian or Dieter, if you could in the back, just dim the lights a little bit so that folks can see the slides here a little better. Not all the way, just part, maybe halfway. Is that possible? Thank you. All right. We'll keep on trying that. If we can move on to the next slide.
And Caesar.
We were able to do it before the meeting. Okay, that's better. Thank you. Hopefully that's a little easier for folks to read. Purpose of tonight's event, as you can see, is to provide an overview of the site, a portfolio to you, and a look at the exchange notice to the tri-party agreement and consent decree, and to answer questions so you can submit any comments about one of those changes. There's a 90-day comment period currently open that began on May 30th and concludes on September 1st. And there was a meeting last night in Richland. There's another meeting tomorrow in Oregon, and all have hybrid participation options. I want to remind everyone that the comments that you provide need to be submitted in writing. The TPA agencies are not accepting verbal comments at tonight's session. We're capturing tonight's discussion as part of that record, but we are recording these meetings so you can refer to that in the future. On the next slide, we'll talk about our agenda briefly. We'll be working into an overview presentation from our representatives from our agencies who are here in the front. And I'll introduce them shortly. We're going to then use the bulk of this meeting for a Q&A session. And we'll end with some concluding remarks. We're set to end at 8 o'clock, but depending on how many questions there are, we can keep rolling until 8:30. I'll be checking our time as we approach 8 o'clock hour to see if we want to extend. I'd like to talk about some meeting guidelines and kind of what I'll be looking out for tonight in support of everyone here. Their focus is on dialogue, as I mentioned earlier. Our purpose to help you prepare your public comments. And so in pursuit of that, we'd really like you to provide your questions up front because this isn't a public comment session. That'll help us to get through as many questions as possible in the room, get responses from our panelists, and help as you provide your questions, help our panelists determine who's going to respond. So we'd like you to keep remarks brief if you can. That goes for our panelists as well. Again, just in the interest of getting as much exchange here as possible. And of course, maintaining a respectful environment in that exchange, knowing that there are differences of opinion on many issues, but in that spirit of dialogue and ensuring that everyone is encouraged to participate. I have a few additional housekeeping notes, and then we'll turn it over to the panelists for their remarks and presentation. So for those of you here at the Olympia DoubleTree, there's an emergency exit, of course, the way that we came in. Also one right here behind me, so just so everyone's aware. There's also a restroom code that's required for at least one of the restrooms, and that's posted on the back wall on a name tag, so as you leave the room, make note of that. There is on your chairs a postcard that has a couple of links, QR codes on it, one for where the public comment page is, and another that and includes additional meeting materials for this evening. There's also a link to an evaluation form that you can take a minute. For those of you online, we've dropped a link to that site in the chat. We're going to be using Microsoft Teams chat tonight, so you can submit a question anytime there. And Colleen, who's helping me here, will be in queue and we all have more to share about the Q&A portion once we get to that point. I would just say of note, we're going to try to get to at least one question for each person who wants to ask one. So if you have many questions that you're submitting in the chat, we will reserve those until we've gone through at least first timers. And then, is there anyone who's on the telephone only? If you could, you'll hit *6 to unmute if you're muted. I don't think there is. Just want to check, and I'm not providing any more instruction about that. For those of you online, you can please stay on mute until it's time to speak your question, and you're welcome to open your camera off as well. Okay. Thank you. I'm done with that housekeeping items and would now like to turn to introductions of our tri-party agency representatives who are with us evening from the Department of Energy, Brian Vance, who is the Hanford site manager, and Mark Silverstein, who is the Hanford site chief counsel. In Washington State, Stephanie Schleif is the nuclear waste program manager for the State Department of Ecology, and Andy Fitz, senior assistant attorney general. And from the Environmental Protection Agency, Tim Hamlin, Land Chemicals and Redevelopment Division Director from Region 10. So we're going to start with some opening remarks, and then we'll roll into the presentation, starting with Mr. Vance.
Good evening. Really great to be here today. Thank you for taking the time for this. I think it'll be an important conversation. The agreement that we'll be discussing tonight regarding the Hanford tank waste mission way ahead represents 4 years of dedicated effort by the department and our regulatory partners, and represents more than the agreement and the way ahead for the tank waste mission. I think a new alignment and strengthening of the relationships that will be key to our ability to successfully continue to progress what I think most recognize as a very complicated mission in the cleanup effort at the Hanford site. As stated, our objective tonight is really to provide an opportunity to share information and perspective that we hope will be helpful to those that are interested in providing public comments. I'm certainly looking forward to a constructive and respectful discussion tonight. I think the grounding element of our dialogue will be a common understanding or objective that we all have for a cleaner and safer Hanford site as we go forward. And so I appreciate the opportunity to be here with all of you for that discussion. My pleasure now to introduce Stephanie Schleif for her.
Thank you, Brian. I'll make sure everyone can hear me okay. Hold it closer.
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, wow, that's close. Okay. All right, well, as folks said, I'm Stephanie Schleif, the Nuclear Waste Program Manager with Washington State Department of Ecology. Before I go into my remarks, I also have some other folks with me here from our office that I want to introduce. We have Suzanne Dahl, who is our Tank Waste Treatment Section Manager, Teresa Howell, who is our Compliance and Regulatory Assistant Section Manager, and then in the back, we have Brian Miller, who is our Communications Manager, and we're all here to do our best to answer any questions that you have for us tonight. We also have Andy Fitz, who represents Washington State Attorney General's Office. The Attorney General's Office represented ecology in this negotiation, so as such, I've asked Andy to take the lead in going through the details of the proposed agreement that's out for public comment. It's a bunch of excitement that we are here with you this evening, speaking about an agreement that, as Brian said, is a result of years of dialogue between my office, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the Department of Energy. The proposed agreement marks a huge achievement for our agencies, and we believe it lays out a durable framework that shows alignment and accelerates work in a way that ensures a safe tank waste retrieval and treatment mission at the site. The Hanford tank waste mission at the site is arguably some of the hardest, if not the hardest piece of the Hanford cleanup mission. And this proposed agreement lays the groundwork for us to move that mission forward as tri-parties. Some of you may have heard the presentation before. Some of you, this may be the first time that you're hearing it. So as such, to ensure everyone has obtained a level of knowledge about the Hanford site cleanup, Brian will go over an overview of the site so everyone's level set on their knowledge of the Hanford cleanup. Again, thank you for taking the time to join us this evening, and we'll do our best to answer any questions that you have for us. With that, I'll turn it over to Tim Hamlin with the Environmental Protection Agency for his remarks. We'll close.
Yes, thank you, Stephanie. I don't have a whole lot to add. I think Brian and Stephanie have said what's important. I'll just reiterate how important it is that, and how happy we are to have you here tonight. So we can show you that we are proud about the agreement we've made and the solid foundation we've established to address the tank waste mission. There are additional things we need to do, and one of the things that the last 4 years of effort has accomplished, I believe, built a foundation of trust that we can use to move forward more quickly on the many questions that Deborah made. But tonight, we're going to tell you about what we have done and describe the framework that we're working with. We intend to work with under this agreement, and look forward to engaging with you. So thank you. And I guess we'll hand it back to Brian for those introductory slides.
Thank you, Tim. So I'll go over a couple of slides just to provide a little more context on the Hanford and Hanford, which I think will hopefully be helpful to you as you think about your effort relative to your public comments, and make tonight maybe a little bit easier to conceptualize. So from a historical perspective, the site was established in 1943 as a part of the Manhattan Project. And from the end of the Second World War, continued on throughout the Cold War until about 1989, when the mission for the Hanford site transformed completely from national security to environmental cleanup. During the period of that 45 years for the mission, for a national security mission, about 20 million uranium metal fuel rods were produced, transported to one of the 9 reactors along the Columbia River, where they were irradiated, produced plutonium. They were then transferred to the Central Plateau, and through several different processes over time, ultimately executed to extract plutonium. Very chemically intensive process, which ultimately required 177 underground tanks to be created to hold the byproducts of the process. And the site produced about 60%, over 60% of the nation's plutonium during that period. Just look at this picture on the slide in front of you. 3 areas that we really talk about. One, labeled as the National Monument, which is the National Monument today. That was really a security and buffer area for the site when it was established and throughout its operations. River Corridor was the region where the 9 reactors were placed along the river. And then the Central Plateau was largely for the processing of the uranium rods to extract the plutonium. Next slide. So if we look at the Hanford site today, and really since 1989, we only have one mission in Hanford, that's the cleanup of the Hanford site. We operate within the Department of Energy Office of Environmental Management. We're one of 15 sites across the country, working through environmental remediation of sites that were used and utilized during the national security mission of the Cold War. For Hanford, we're roughly 580 square miles. In South Central Washington, where the site is located in the insert, about 50 miles on the Columbia River runs through the site. From an organizational perspective, the Department of Energy has 2 offices there. One is the Office of River Protection, which was established specifically for the tank waste mission, which we'll be talking about tonight. And then the Richland Operations Office, which provides site security, infrastructure, remediation, groundwater, all the other aspects of the cleanup. I manage both offices, and both offices will be combining in October this year. We oversee the work of 6 prime contractors, and to execute that mission, the department serves as a strategic alignment and strategic integrator for our contractors, setting conditions for them to do their work and do it in a collaborative, constructive, and efficient way. We operate under congressionally appropriated funds of $3 billion in FY24. And we employ roughly 12,000 people, between the federal employees, our direct support contractors, the prime contractors, and the support contractors, the vendors that the primes hire to do portions of their work. So while our focus is on the holistic and the tank waste mission, the slide also represents the wide range of activities being conducted across the site on a daily basis to progress the overall mission, as we clean up the site in a manner that we believe creates a safe workplace for our workforce, protects our community and the environment of the Pacific Coast. Next slide really kind of highlights a lot that's been accomplished in the 35 years of our cleanup, not always recognized for the progress that we made. So to go around the quad, 9 blocks on the chart. Of the 9 reactors, one's a national park, the B reactor, 7 are interstate storage, which means they're in a state of stable condition. They'll remain in that position for 75 years, and all the infrastructure around those reactors has been remediated. We're down to 1 K West reactor to finish remediation and place it in interstate storage. Almost 19 million tons of soil debris transferred to our on-site landfill. Approaching 1,000 facilities remediated, over 1,000 waste sites remediated. The slide says 220,000 gallons of tank waste treated, ready for the delivery to the waste treatment plant. The tank site seizure removal system is operating today. We think we're going to be close to 400,000 by the end of this patch, and then our goal by the end of the year is over 800,000. We've retrieved 21 underground tanks. Retrieving, I'll talk about what that is in a few minutes. They treated 33.8 billion gallons of groundwater to remove hundreds of tons of contaminants that were placed in the soil during the national security mission. So while the cleanup mission, we've accomplished a lot, we still have a lot to do. The mission is projected to last into the 2070, 2080 timeframe. But I think if we think about the mission that we have in front of us, we're excited about starting a new chapter, which is tank waste treatment and ultimately disposition chapter of the cleanup mission. But we anchor everything we do on the health and safety of our workforce, protection of our community, as we clean up the intersite environment. Next slide. A little bit of a focus area on the tank waste part of the mission, as we'll talk about tonight. What I'm representing there is a slice of the central plateau, looking to the west. In the unfiltered picture, you can see Mount Adams and Mount Rainier in the background. Out at the top of the slide is the 200 West area, which is one tank farms area. I'll talk about, I have a slide on that in a few seconds. I'll focus on 200 East is really the area of the site where our current activities relative to the direct complexity waste program are centering. So 200 East is the home of 91 underground tanks, 11 tank farms. The green identifiers on the slide indicate single shell tank farms, the blue are double shell tank farms. And in the 200 East area, there's 25 tanks, 25 double shell tanks, 24 actually in operation. We operate a tank integrity program, both 200 East and 200 West, to monitor the tanks and manage the tanks to enhance the longevity to support the mission as well as we can. Many of these tanks are very, very old. We're also actively retrieving tanks, which is moving the containment or the contents from the older single shell tanks into the newer double shell tanks staged for future treatment and mobilization and hopefully disposition. We completed the C farm within the last month. We completed the physical work at AX farm, and we'll start the first A farm tank this month. So the retrieval process is ongoing. And then we are treating tank waste today. The tank site seizure removal system is operating today. And the second batch of our second campaign, which is staging waste, treated waste in the AP farm, will ultimately be delivered to waste treatment plant when they're ready to receive tank waste. And at the bottom of the picture, you see the 65-acre waste treatment plant. There's really 2 parts to focus on there. The part that we're focused on now is the low activity portion of that site or that campus, which is effectively all the finished buildings you see with the green roofs and everything. That's where the low activity, waste facility is, the lab, and then the effluent management facility, and then the 14 other facilities that make that facility operate. And then you can also see the pretreatment facility, high level waste facility. Both look similar to what they looked like in 2012, when that portion of the mission, the high level waste portion of the mission was slowed down, resolved technical issues, didn't make sense to spend money on construction when engineering was not caught up. So we halted there, but we have continued to invest in the design for high level waste. We've maintained the assets. And as a result of this agreement, we'll be moving forward with the high level waste facility design. And we're already doing limited construction that doesn't represent a risk of rework. So there's really two operating islands at waste treatment plant right now. There's an operating island associated with direct electric waste, and then a construction island, which is on the other side. And so that's really a quick overview. The next slide is really just a little bit more of a focus on 200 East tank farms. I'll just highlight a couple of things. So I talked about what we're doing there, tank integrity programs, retrieval, treatment, waste treatment plant. The plant is completing construction, we're turning it on effectively. And you can see the integrated disposal facility on the left-hand side. That's where the full glass containers will go. That facility is complete. And then on the right-hand side, not unshaded, was the liquid effluent retention facility and the effluent treatment facility. Those will take the byproducts of the process and make sure we remove the constituents from the chemical, radiological, and dispose of them correctly or appropriately within on-site timelines, so we don't destroy anything to the environment outside of the permits. And when we talk about permits, we have 76 of 77 permits completed that we need to operate the plant. The last is Washington Department of Health, so Stephanie Verkeever complete. With the work done to support the waste treatment plant for people like to be waste, which is exciting as well. And so what's different when you think about the tank waste mission today, we're treating tank waste today with tank sensing removal. Our waste treatment plant is energized, operating. We have 2 full melters of glass. We put 4 containers of clean glass from each one. Well, the second for melter 2 within the last 3 or 4 months. And we're continuing to progress through the commissioning program, which is effectively the structured testing program that ensures the systems and equipment and our people and our processes and procedures are all going to be ready next year when we start delivering tank waste for vitrification. And then when you look at the high level waste side, construction at the high level waste facility limited, but we're really focused at this stage on the design for HLW progressing the design. That's 200 East. 200 West, 86 tanks, 7 tank farms, only 1 double shell tank farm with 3 tanks, the SY farm. You can see on the slide. Discussions tonight will center on the 22 tanks listed in the agreement. Those are associated with U, S, and SX farms. And then you'll also hear discussions about the cross-site transfer line. That's the line that both is in place. It's going to have to be recertified, but it creates the opportunity to transfer waste from the roughly 5 to 7 miles between east and west tank farms in the future. So the bigger picture again, 200 East, as you look towards the end of the decade, direct activity waste is operating. We're treating, vitrifying low activity waste, and we're storing it, putting it in a disposal cell, the integrated disposal facility. We'll be completing the design for the high level waste facility before we start construction beyond 2027. And then 200 West will be staging for the retrievals at 200 West, and then ultimately what Mark and Andy will talk about, the grouting and transportation of the waste to disposal locations in Utah, Texas. So hope that's a helpful overview for the, I'll say, the more legal description of the agreement. But I think it was important to provide that context, and I think it's covered. I'll turn it over to Mark.
Okay, am I coming in clear? Okay, good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here. So you read about the holistic agreement. I hear it's the talk of the town in Olympia and Seattle these days, but what is the holistic agreement. The holistic agreement, in one sentence to me, is proposing a path forward with Hanford tank waste retrieval and remission for approximately the next 20 years. I'm looking for a general time frame associated with it between now and 2040 years. Near-term commitments that we're going to talk about, some longer-term ones. But the story really starts back in 2020 when we initiated confidential mediation amongst the tri-party agencies. And I think we held somewhere in the magnitude of about 100 mediation sessions, which I'm convinced is some sort of record. That said, we announced a conceptual agreement in May of 23. And it's important to note that there were, we can't talk about what was discussed in the confidential mediations, but there were certain documents, key documents that informed our discussions. Some of those were an analysis of alternatives that was performed associated with the high-level waste treatment mission, what's called the HOW AOA, analysis of alternatives. The various system plans that were done, which is not a decision document so much as a planning document that looks at different scenarios of accomplishing the Hanford mission. And Andy will mention a little more about this later. Lastly, the testbed initiative, which was, we did an environmental assessment under the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, the waste incidental debris processing documentation and determination that was made associated with the testbed initiative, which is a 2,000-gallon test that we're executing associated with routing and pre-treated tank waste, as well as an EPA variance that was associated with the test bed. So these are some of the documents that informed our discussions. So generally speaking, the host agreement is, well, not generally, it's 3 parts. Number 1, a settlement agreement, which contains the overarching provisions. There's a variety of legalese in there. It has components that we'll speak to a little more detailed, involving the public comment and involvement process and some substantive amendments. The second component is proposed changes to the consent decree. And the third component is proposed changes to the tri-party agreement, TPA as it's known, which is a federal facility compliance agreement. The TPA changes are effectuated through what we call a change package. And that's why in the holistic agreement that's been posted, you'll see things labeled as change packages, which are the individual attachments to the document that's out for your review. Okay, turn it over to Andy. Next slide.
Thanks, Mark. So I'm Andy Fitz from the Washington Attorney General's office. There we go. This is working now. Closer. Okay. So it may be helpful to take a step back and when Mark mentions consent decree and tri-party agreement, explain what those are, because that'll put some context around the changes that we're talking about. So the tri-party agreement is the original legal document that governs Hanford cleanup. It's entered into with EPA, the state of Washington, and the Department of Energy. It was signed in 1989, and it has milestones for all of Hanford cleanup. Environmental media like soil and groundwater cleanup, which is largely overseen by EPA, and then the tank waste mission that we're talking about tonight, where the State Department of Ecology is the regulator under a federal law called the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, and the state is actually the lead regulator under that law once it has a program that gets blessed by EPA, which just happened. So that tri-party agreement originally had deadlines through, every part of the Hanford cleanup. We fast forward to sort of 2005, 2006, and the state has some concerns about progress with starting work and making progress on the weed treatment plan, as well as the very first tank retrievals that were under the tri-party agreement. And we ended up filing a lawsuit around that. We resolved the lawsuit in 2010 with a new legal instrument called a consent decree. So this is something that is essentially a court order but it was agreed to consensually by the Department of Energy and Ecology. We negotiated it, and then it was blessed by a judge and is overseen by a judge. So the consent decree sort of covers the construction and early operations of the waste treatment plant, plus retrieving 19 of those single shell tanks. And then everything else with the tank waste mission is still in the tri-party agreement. That includes sort of carrying forward the work once the waste treatment plant starts. So in that original consent decree, the deadlines for starting the waste treatment plant were in 2019. And it was the same date for the three major facilities that Brian mentioned. So there's something called a pre-treatment plant, which takes tank waste, and it was intended to separate it into two different streams. One really concentrated with most of the radionuclides, the radioactive portion of the waste. That would be then sent to something called the high-level waste facility, turned into blast logs, which are intended for deep geologic disposal once the nation has a deep geologic repository. It was intended in Yucca Mountain. It's a little unclear where we're going to have it. The rest of the waste, which has 90% of the volume, but only 10% of the radioactivity, is called low activity waste. And that would go to that low activity waste facility. And so 2019 was the deadline for getting all three of those parts of the waste treatment plant complex up and running. And then there was a deadline 3 years later for it to sort of hit what we call initial operations, where it's treating waste at the pace that will sort of get us through the clean mission. Almost immediately, and Brian mentioned technical issues with the pre-treatment plant, delayed that part of the waste treatment plant complex. And the state and energy had a period of negotiation about modifications to the decree, couldn't reach agreement, and ended up submitting sort of competing motions to modify the decree to the federal court judge. Those were resolved by the judge in 2016 with changes to the decree, where the deadline for completing the pretreatment facility and high-level waste facility were moved to 2033. And the deadline for completing and starting operations of the low-activity waste facility was moved to 2023. Yeah, before, right. Well, the pertinent thing is with COVID, there was an adjustment to that date. It's now 2025, August 1st, 2025 for that facility to start. So that's sort of, I go through that because that's the foundation for the changes that we're talking about now. So looking at the slide, we are keeping those timeframes for starting the low activity waste facility 2025 and the high level waste facility 2033. I will say that there's some possibility of some adjustment of that high level waste facility date once DOE submits a detailed schedule. But we don't expect that to be a major shift from that mid-2030s timeframe. The big change is the pre-treatment facility. And Mark mentioned in the course of mediation, there was something called an analysis of alternatives. What that showed is that the fastest way to actually start treating that high-level waste part of the tank waste is to do something that energy is doing a low activity waste facility now, which is basically bypassing that pre-treatment facility and doing what's called a direct feed of the facility. So we have built milestones and a structure for moving forward with that direct feed approach for the high level waste facility. And then the remaining pre-treatment functions, because some functions need to be replicated to start this direct feed, will be milestones developed for those once the high level facility starts. And really what we're talking about is a process of removing chemicals from the tank waste, from the high level waste portion of the tank waste, so that you're creating fewer canisters, which actually speeds up that part of the process. It's a great efficiency measure that shortens the lifespan of the tank waste treatment mission. So in a nutshell, those are the changes. Basically holding serve on the dates for starting treatment of low activity waste and high level waste, but filling in the sort of optimizing pre-treatment functions down the line to make the process most efficient. There are a couple of new facilities to support the high level waste facility that I just sort of alluded to. One's called a effluent management facility, another's called a waste transfer vault, and we have milestones for those to be, or a process for milestones for those two facilities to support the startup of the high level waste treatment. So the dates for pre-treatment will be revised, as I said, once the high level waste facility starts up. Next slide, please. I think I actually covered everything on this slide. So. Back to you, Mark. Thank you.
So Andy mentioned the retrievals that are required of the consent decree. This proposed agreement maintains the schedule for the remaining milestone for the consent decree for retrieving waste from the ANAX tank farms, which is 9 tanks. However, we are extending the deadlines for tank A104 and A105, which are 2 tanks that have significant challenges with them. Tank A105, for example, has a bottom of the tank liner that is blown out 3/4 of the way around due to a steam event from the 1970s. So it has some significant retrieval challenges with it. So those deadlines will be extended, and the department has the option to substitute 2 tanks from SX and U farm in place of those 2 tanks to meet the milestone. But ultimately, we're still retrieving the same number of tanks under the consent decree as was originally made. Additionally, there's only 1 tank left in the ANAX complex, so there are 10 tanks total, 9 under the consent decree. If you're good at math, I'm not. Last one is the lonely tank, I call it A103. That tank is currently required to be retrieved under the tri-party agreement, EPA, and we're simply extending the deadline to complete retrieval of that tank to better align with the retrieval sequence of the rest of the tanks in those 2 farms. So we talked about AX farms, which we're just about wrapping up retrieval of, and we'll be moving into A farm to complete the retrievals there. Next slide. So a part of the discussion and negotiations was, after we complete the retrievals in AX, where are we going to go next? And what the parties decided is the proposal for retrieving 22 tanks from S, SX, and U area by 2040. And coupled with that discussion was the continued pursuit of alternative treatment technologies, mainly grout. And so there are certain conditions associated with the retrieval of those 22 tanks. The idea is, or the proposal is, that the waste from those tanks will be retrieved, retreated, grouted, and disposed of out of the state of Washington. Now, one point I want to emphasize here is that we have not yet made a decision about the grouting and out-of-state disposal locations. That's yet to be determined. The department has to go through a series of processes before we make the ultimate decision on that. Things like business case analysis. We already have kicked off a NEPA review to assess that. We'll have to go to a WEIR, we have to pursue a variance. There are a series of processes that have to be completed before we make a decision about ultimately where the pre-treated tank waste is grouted and how it gets there. Some of the other conditions that are associated with the 22 tanks by 2040. So we have here what we call just-in-time scaling, which is essentially intended to prevent a backlog at the site of pre-treated tank waste. Additionally, the conditions that I mentioned remain in place through at least 2040. Next slide.
So Mark mentioned a couple of typical tanks. One of the issues we talked about concern is as you have tanks that are leak prone or have waste that's largely dry. The retrieval techniques that energy uses today don't work so well. It doesn't really work well to use high pressure liquid to sort of stir up the waste to be able to suck it out, which you have a potential of a leak in the tank. So to address those difficult tanks, we agreed on a process for energy to convene an independent panel of experts to inform it of potential different, new or improved retrieval techniques. And then energy is obligated to take at least 2 of those technologies forward into a phased development and testing process to have better techniques for retrieving tanks into the future. We also agreed to build additional tank storage capacity on the west side of Hanford, where Brian mentioned there was 1 double-fill tank farm. So it's not decided yet whether that's going to be 1 large double-fill tank or a series of smaller storage tanks or some other storage capacity that best, optimizes waste management in that part of Hanford. But that's one need that we've agreed to address over at that part of the site. There are pipelines, basically, is a simple way to put it. They're called cross-site transfer lines intended to move waste from that west area of Hanford to the east side of Hanford where the waste treatment plant is located. And we agreed on milestones for those pipelines to become operational. They're currently not in use and not ready to be used. And this is part of the reason why that route approach is being used for those west side tanks. There's not a current way to move that waste to get to the waste treatment plant complex. So that routing approach allows those tanks to start being retrieved and that waste to be treated without, relying on the waste treatment plant or those lines. But the date through 2030 for the what's called a supernatant line that takes sort of the low activity waste liquid, and 2036 for what's called a sorted takes basically everything else. Finally, I mentioned the tri-party agreement and how it has been sort of encompassing for the entire mission. There are end dates for completing things like taking all the waste out of all the tanks. That date right now is 2040. Closing all the tank farms, that date is 2043. And treating all the waste, that date is currently 2047. I think everyone recognizes that all 3 of those dates are not going to be met. It's just not physically possible to meet those dates. The state, however, was not willing to replace those dates with different dates until we know, basically what better dates to replace them with. And part of that is that, once you put a date, it pretty much moves in one direction. We wanted to keep them in place until we have better information. So I mentioned the negotiation to sort of round out the dates in the consent decree for the pretreatment functions that will happen when that high-level waste facility begins operation. That's also the time when we will reset, revise the dates that stay in the tri-party agreement until we make that provision. In the meantime, we have language that obliges the Department of Energy to continue working toward completing those missions as expeditiously as possible. And we have all of the milestones that take us through 2040 that have to be done regardless to get to those end date milestones. So we've got near-term progress for the next 15 plus years after that.
Thank you, Lee. So the last component, the first, but the last we'll speak about is the settlement agreement. So what does the settlement agreement include? Well, it does include a statement that the DOE intends to forbear from applying what's called a high-level waste interpretation at Hanford. What that means is that we will refrain, we will, from applying the high-level waste interpretation, which is one of the ways the department, one of the authorities the department has to determine what is or what is not high-level waste. This settlement agreement includes a commitment to that will forbear from applying it. It does not affect our other authorities. So, for example, I mentioned the weir waste incidental debris processing authority determinations that we made. We still have that authority, and the forbearance provision of the settlement agreement does not affect our other authorities like your authority. In addition, the settlement agreement has a commitment that the parties are going to get back together and talk about some of the additional components of the tri-party agreement that Andy gave us a nice history on. So that includes the appendix H and I. So that appendix H deals mainly with the process that will follow for retrieving tanks under the EPA tri-party agreement, and appendix I, which deals mainly with tank closure. There are aspects of that that I think both parties recognize are perhaps somewhat dated. They go back to 1989. So we've agreed to sit down and talk and see whether there are any updates that may be made to those respective appendices. We will also talk about whether there are additional offsite ground disposal conditions needed after the proposed conditions expire, which is at least 2040. Well, we've committed to get back together with the state and talk about what additional conditions may need to apply. Although the conditions that I did mention apply the duration of the 22 tanks retrievals. That's not time limited. They're specific to the retrieval of the 22 tanks from SSS and Newport. And also the settlement agreement expressly acknowledges that the department has to complete applicable regulatory processes like NEPA, as I mentioned earlier, the National Environmental Policy Act, the National Historic Preservation Act, and HPA. So we are midstream. We have actually initiated a supplement analysis. It's all for the refugee household waste and new storage capacity, and a separate SA supplement analysis for the 22 tanks. Just a little bit of background there. A supplement analysis is a tool to conduct NEPA review, whereas to assess whether or not there are any significant change in circumstances or new information that warrants the preparation of a new EIS or a supplemental EIS. That's it. Thank you. Next slide. So back to Stephanie.
Right, thank you, Mark. So I'm going to cover the next couple of slides. So next steps, where we go with the agreement. We will complete the public comment period, and I want to highlight here that we already received feedback from the public that they wanted an extension to the public comment period. So we went out with an original 60-day public comment period. We heard feedback requesting us to extend that. We extended it by 30 days for a total of a 90-day public comment period that now ends on September 1st. After we complete the public comment period, I expect parties to review any comments that we receive, make any adjustments to the agreement that's out for public comment. We'll also issue a response to public comment document. As Mark referred to, they will complete any applicable regulatory processes such as National Environmental Policy Act, National Historic Preservation Act. And then finally, once we agree on the changes, after we complete the public comment period, we'll implement proposed amendments to the consent decree in the federal district court. And then finally, the agencies will sign and implement proposed revisions to the tri-party agreement. Slide. And then this is a recap of what Brian spoke to being in the public meeting. This week, we're doing public meetings throughout the state. Yesterday, we were in Richland. Today, we're here with you in Olympia. Tomorrow, we'll be in Hood River. And you can provide us public comment on the proposed changes through September 1st, like I said, via 2 different means, electronically or by mail. And I'll also just highlight that if you're wondering where to focus your attention on reviewing the change package, it is about 100 pages. And starting on page 19 are the changes to the consent decree and the tri-party agreement changes. And with that, I think the next slide, any questions, and I'll turn it back to Ryan.
Thanks. Can everyone hear me? I got a note that it was a little low before, so, okay, good, back. All right. We're going to turn to the Q&A portion now. So again, focus here is to inform your public comments on the changes that were just outlined in that presentation. Just a couple of reminders. We're going to move between online and in the room. I think we've got a couple of comments or a couple of questions already. So we'll be, moving back and forth. As you raise your hand, Patrick, I think is going to run the mic for us. So we can keep a queue there. And as we call on you online, I'll say your name and we can have you unmute to join. the conversation here and state your question into the room if you want, or if you'd like us to read it, we're happy to do that for you as well. As let us know in the chat. As you are on the mic, if you could just say your name and again, start with your question. And based on our experience last night, we had a fuller house, but just a reminder, if we could keep your context, additional context to your question as concise as possible, 30 seconds, maybe a minute, that will help us work through the questions. And if you have multiple questions or follow-ups, we're going to, again, try to get to everyone at least one round, and then we can return to you. So if you've got multiple questions, maybe start with your priority, and then we'll be sure to get back to you. As we've got time, I will be looking at time closely, calling about 7:45 to see where we're at, and if we need more time to accommodate more Q&A, we can extend that by about 30 minutes this evening. So with that, I think that we're ready to start off. Why don't we start in the room? And if anyone has a question, just go ahead and raise your hand and we'll start there. And I think the mics are pretty sensitive, so you might need to hold it really close, which is just
I actually have a little page of questions, so, but yeah, there aren't that many people. I won't be asking all, but I just, you want to get circled back to.
Sure, absolutely.
But one that I think, maybe hasn't been asked before, I don't know, that I would like addressed, was just a question regarding the movement of the waste off-site. I'm curious to know, whether it's part of these negotiations or the tri-party agreement in general, that the states of Washington and Oregon will have, what will their formal role be in helping to determine how that waste is moved off-site? Are they going to have a voice in that process, and is it a formal voice within this framework of the tri-party agreement?
Well, certainly took over the state perspective, but obviously one of the primary conditions that's part of the proposed agreement is that the waste has to be disposed of out of the state of Washington. So from that aspect, that's expressly in the agreement itself. How it gets there has not yet been decided. What route it takes and where exactly it is routed has not been decided yet. So Washington will have a role throughout the process, particularly with review of the NEPA document. I'll let Washington speak to other subject matter to the extent. But
Well, I'll start by noting that under our state hazardous waste laws, we have minimum standards for how waste is transported, but the Department of Ecology doesn't directly regulate that in terms of like, you need to have permission before you move something that is called hazardous waste. I mean, there are conditions that attach, but you know, things move across the country through states every day. I think the state control gets some notice of waste movement, but it isn't, there's not a permit system in place where there has to be permission first. There's standards that apply that say here are the type of containers you need to use and that sort of thing. I do know that well, I'll turn it to Stephanie, I think, to maybe speak further about the specific issue of transportation here.
So I'm sure you can hear me okay. Okay. So Mark referenced the fact that they would do a National Environmental Policy Act environmental analysis associated with waste that would be transported on the Hanford site. What level of analysis they do under NEPA, that's Department of Energy's decision to make, where they're going to route the waste, where they're going to transport the waste, that is Department of Energy's decision to make. But ecology would review any NEPA analysis or environmental analysis that the Department of Energy will do. I would say as part of this agreement, Department of Energy is not making that decision on where the waste is going to be routed. that will be analyzed in the supplemental analysis, environmental analysis that Mark spoke about. That said, we do encourage the Department of Energy to do a separate public process as part of that environmental analysis. I think that's all I'll highlight. I think Tim wants to add something.
Yeah, I guess just to emphasize, it is a Department of Energy decision. And it is not, it flows out of the holistic agreement, but it's not, we did not negotiate this, we did not talk about it. It's sort of a follow-on issue that it's now the Department of Energy debate. EPA joins with ecology, encouraging Department of Energy to conduct robust public engagement on the question. And EPA does have a role also in reviewing whatever documents ecology creates underneath that, or to comply with the legal.
Okay. All right, the next question is going to be from an online participant, and Colleen is going to read the question.
Yeah, the first question from our online participants is from Laura Feldman. And I'll read the question. Laura, if you need to provide context, feel free to unmute. But her question is it safe to direct feed high-level waste without pre-treatment?
The answer is yes. The idea is that, what is a direct feed approach? It's going directly from the tank farms to the high level waste treatment facility. There will be some support facilities like the waste transfer wall, which helps move the waste from the respective tank farm to the facility. But the facility is designed to treat the high level waste, fraction of the waste. The direct feed approach is also being pursued right now as we speak for the low activity fraction of the waste, via DF law, as it's known, and the low activity waste facility. So as far as a concept, we're executing that right now with the low activity fraction of the waste. The idea is that you would replicate it in a sense, with respect to going directly from the tank farms to the respective treatment facility for high level waste treatment. Delmar, looks like that's.
Yeah, I'll add a bit. As Andy had said, the high-level waste really is to capture the bulk of the radioactive material and minimize the chemical component, the non-radiological components. So running the high-level waste in a direct feed scenario is perfectly safe. What it does is means that it'll be operating a little more inefficiently to start up with, i.e. we produce a little more canisters moving forward. Until we get the following stuff from a safety perspective and from an effectiveness perspective, it will work fine. It is perfectly safe as designed.
And the simple way it's been explained to me is that the pre-treatment facility is really for the low activity waste part of the waste treatment, not the high level waste facility. So it's really the efficiency that Delmar mentioned that, will come later.
Sorry, we have a little bit of noise coming from the hallway, and just to for all the speakers, the mics are very sensitive, they're really close, so make sure that everyone can hear. We're ready for another question in the room. Yep, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Lincoln Sherwood, and I'm from Seattle, Washington. You've all had 4 years of closed-door negotiations to discuss the cleanup of high-level nuclear waste that will affect decisions all the way through 2040 and beyond for thousands of years. Yesterday at the meeting, you said that you wanted to hear as many voices as possible. Yet, when you were asked why you did not hold a public meeting in Seattle, Portland, and Spokane, you gave a lackluster answer about the offering virtually made up for the additional meetings, and that you were so generous to extend the 60-day period to a 90-day period. So I would like to hear from Ecology, since you are the regulator, you work for us, the people of Washington, why have you not advocated for public participation in Seattle, Portland, and Spokane, and why are you not advocating for an equitable public meeting there?
Thanks for thanks for the question. Just like you covered last night, we talked about why we selected the meeting locations that we did. I don't have much more to add beyond that.
Could you tell the people that are on the meeting today?
Yes, absolutely. So you asked about why we're holding meetings in the Hood River and Olympia. We've held previous meetings in the Hood River that have been successful in the past. And as I discussed yesterday, we believe that Hood River has got that is more centrally located down in Oregon, allows us to Portland and Eastern Oregon. And then over at Olympia, we had several considerations, including the location, but there were much other factors that we considered, including ADA accessibility, and new cost, availability of staff, a couple of other factors. But I do want to acknowledge that we hear your guys' comments and please come to us after the meeting, give us, more feedback if you want, or you can leave a comment formally during the comment period, consider the comments. I don't have a lot more to add on that, people like I said yesterday, but we really do encourage the feedback that everybody has to share with us.
I'm just concerned because Mark himself said that the talk of town in Seattle. So if you know that this is the talk of the town there, why are we not having a meeting? That's my question.
Thanks for the question. Brian, do you have more that you want to respond to there?
I don't have anything more to add, but we really appreciate the feedback. We'll take it back and we'll share it with, our management is hearing the feedback. So really appreciate the feedback. That's my answer to that.
Thank you. We're going to move on to the next question, which is coming from online. And I think this is another one that Glenn is going to read off.
All right, hear me? All right, the next question we have from online is from Catherine Roberts. She has her question in the chats, but feel free to unmute if you would like to add to this context to this. But the question is, has the expert panel evaluating tank waste retrieval technologies already been convened? And are they from industry or academic?
Well, good. No, the panel has not yet been convened. And I think the idea is that it will be a cross section of experts from industry and academia.
Okay. Next question in the room.
Hi, John State, the Wetlands Complex Manager. On the grouting, we're going to be picking a grouting destination and a grouting method by the end of this year, which is only 5.5 months away. Is that a realistic target? Because everything at Hanford takes tons of study. Yeah. Oh, okay. This is regarding the grouting schedule, the nail down the grouting destination and the grouting method by the end of this year. That's only 5.5 months away, which is maybe 5 seconds in Hanford time. So how realistic is that goal, and how are you going to accomplish selecting a grouting method and a destination in such short of a time?
I think, it is an aggressive timeline. I'll give you that. And we're certainly, doing our best. As I said, the target date right now for completing the supplement analysis is end of the year, early next year. And one thing to remember is that the actual 22 tanks retrievals and routing exercise is after we finish the current retrievals. So we're currently in an advanced farm, which is through 2028. So the idea is that we want to ensure that we have the required processes completed and start the pre-work that's necessary to exercise that work ahead of when we actually have to start that exercise. But just to give you a sense of timing of when the project is kicked off, would be after what we're currently doing retrieval work. Do that.
Okay. Grace Lewis online. If you can hear us here, feel free to unmute to ask your question.
Yes. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's been a little bit difficult to hear on this end, so just want to make sure my audio is coming through. Thanks so much for taking my question. This question is really for anyone with the Department of Ecology. Last night and tonight, it's been stated that the Department of Energy is doing a supplement analysis. And last night, the Department of Energy said this supplement analysis will not be finished until after the state has signed the agreement. Under the State Environmental Policy Act, the Department of Ecology does have the duty to mitigate impacts before taking action. So how is the Department of Ecology able to sign the agreement without the supplemental analysis? And why hasn't the Department of Ecology ensured that the risks associated with trucking through Spokane are mitigated? Thanks.
So our position is that the consent decree and the tri-party agreement themselves, those schedules and milestones are not subject to SEPA. Certainly actions that the department takes to permit things in implementing the requirements of the tri-party agreement are subject to SEPA. So that's the point at which SEPA would be satisfied. I also, just in terms of general timelines, want to note for everyone there's a pretty robust body of environmental analysis already under NEPA that I think energy is going to be drawing from. I expect with a number of the activities that are related to the proposals today, and in particular with the waste treatment plant and tank retrievals, those have already been subject to past EISs, and I think it's fair to say that the state shares the view that the changes related to the waste treatment plant are within the scope of what were already addressed in prior NEPA efforts. So it's maybe not as daunting as it might seem. It's not starting from scratch.
Okay, back into the room here.
Hello, Hanford, I've been through challenge. So I asked a question about the 23 tanks yesterday, and Mark, you shared that 2028 is when you're thinking of starting retrievals. I was wondering if you could just walk us through the other documents you'll need before those retrievals start. So when will you anticipate petitioning EPA for a treatability variance? And how will that work? Will you do a treatability variance on all 22 tanks? Will you do it tank by tank, or will you do it in batches of tanks that are similar with similar waste? And then also the weir process. When do you anticipate starting the weir process for this?
I don't have the detailed schedule. What I can speak to, I think you did a pretty good job actually about planning the processes that we have to go through for that time. So the other one we did, I don't think you mentioned, with the business case analysis, which, as I mentioned last night, kind of looks at what is the business case associated with a local routing exercise versus a not local. So sort of that's in the perspective of closer facility. We've got the NEPA review, any associated HTAs that has to be completed, the WEIR documentation, the variance, which the general process for that, I want to speak to this, but the department submits a petition to EPA. EPA has to review that, comment on that. There's a draft rulemaking, and then ultimately a final summary. So, there are a variety of processes. I don't know the details of the variance yet. I can, obviously we did the variance for the testbed initiative. How that variance petition will be constructed for purposes of the 22 tanks, whether it's batches of tanks or all the tanks, I don't know yet, to be honest with you, but I recognize that that's something that we'll have to assess. And so I'm not sure if there's more I can say about the exact timelines, but they have appropriately identified the respective processes that are going to be performed.
Yeah, I think that I appreciate your question because I think we're wrestling with the same questions. We're not sure yet the most effective and efficient way to proceed with the whole variance issue. Is it going to be one, several? I think you identified options we're wondering about ourselves. A lot of it depends on the chemical composition, what is being requested in the variance. So if we can find a way to do it in larger batches, I think that's probably the efficient way to go, but it's not broken. We're wrestling with all that as we review what Department of Energy includes in the request. And Kevin, we will be talking about it with them probably before they submit, and after this. Make sure we can proceed finding a way to grant the variance.
Okay, turning to Rachel online.
Yeah, the next question is from Rachel Denito. I'm going to read that question, but real quick, there was a request. If anybody's answering a question in the audience to speak louder, I think they're having a hard time hearing audience questions. So the question from Rachel Denito, there's been mention of shipping the waste to Utah or Texas. Have or will those communities be consulted regarding their willingness to accept that waste? The community in New Mexico, Texas has been unwilling to accept waste from sites like San Onofre plant in California in the past. Why would they be willing to accept Hanford's?
So, from our perspective, it's really targeting states that have licensed permitted facilities to receive the waste. So our treated waste will be, meet their waste acceptance criteria, which is what we'll have. And so as far as the consultation with the states, obviously would be our, pursuing them as potential disposal sites, if we have to interact with them. We have not had direct interaction with communities, but again, it's from our perspective, at least from community's perspective, ensuring that it's going to a facility that meets their respective acceptance criteria.
All right, other first round of questions in the room?
Hi, my name is Ella. I'm from Seattle. And my question is about tank retrieval, but I'm particularly curious about solvent pumping. Because it's my understanding that the DOE approves solvent pumping to remove leakable liquids from leaking tanks. And I know leakable liquids must be removed as soon as practicable. So I was just curious that since this technology is available, isn't it practicable to use this technology now? So that's.
Oh, well, it's not, your question is not directly related to the scope of what's in the holistic agreement, but I will say this, we have as a component of the milestone package associated with the retrieval technologies, agreed that the expert panel will provide recommendations and analysis on solvent pumping as a potential tool. So we will be taking a look at it, if you will, in the context of that technology evaluation package agreement. I don't think there's anything else that wants to be moved on solvent pumping.
Okay. Just another note, folks online are having a hard time hearing, so,
That's one.
yeah, so, really get that mic close. Folks in the room may be able to hear, so we'll try to speak more clearly here in the room. Thank you for the notes in the chat about your experience over there. So, and let us know if it's not working. We'll continue to work on that. We have another question online, and Colleen, I think that you're going to read.
Yeah, the next question is from Liz Matson. So her question, why aren't the TPA agencies waiting for the test results from the 2,000 gallon test bed initiative before proposing how and where to grout tens of millions of gallons of tank waste?
Well, first of all, we did do a test on 3 gallons of waste that was successfully grouted and disposed of. And you know, that we are actively in the process now of executing on the test bed initiative, which the plan at this point is to pre-treat and route at respective facilities in Utah and Texas, 1,000 gallons in Utah, and 1,000 gallons in Texas, which will continue the evaluation of grounds and alternative fuel technology. So we had already completed the 3-gallon test, and the test bed initiative is actively underway, or at least about to kick off.
Okay, back into the room. First round of questions. Yeah, I see a couple hands. Couple hands, perfect.
I'm Dan Series, I'm the River speaker. I want to follow up on John's question in front of me about the timing. So, end of 2024, part of the agreement, you're going to come up with a selection of where and how. You're saying that the supplement analysis is going to happen sometime around that time. That doesn't fit in any involvement, any feedback from the communities that have had a decision to route. That seems to presume that you'll not be pursuing a robust environmental impact statement on that timeline, just based on any EIS I've ever seen, including it in Hanford. So I hear from the agencies that you want to see a robust public involvement process, but the agreement, the timeline set forth preclude that. So how are you going to, at the state level, and EPA level, ensure that the public has a say? Because what is being presented is not what you just asked for. So thank you. And I would just reiterate that we think that it's absolutely fundamental to have the needs analysis be in front of people so that we can understand the stakes. For instance, moving tank waste from that up the Deschutes River in Oregon. Kind of idea, I think moving tank waste up the Deschutes River might be. I know it.
So,
Sorry about that, Dan. Go ahead.
yeah. The only thing I'll say is, well, one, Department will continue to think about what there are additional opportunities for public engagement on this issue. Number two.
Second here, we figure out the audio. Pause for just a minute here while we figure out what's going on.
That's on. Sorry about that. Okay, I'm watching Friday for that too. It's not.
Mark, let's hold for just a second, because I think folks might have some hard time hearing. We've got, tech support coming, to back us up here, so.
Hello, okay. I do. We would encourage you to make comments now. We are in a active public comment period. To the extent riverkeeper, anyone has concerns, issues, comments you want to make about where the pre-treated liquid tank waste is transported and routed, you're welcome to make those comments now. We would encourage you to make those comments now. That's the type of feedback, exactly why we're here and what we want to hear from you all. So please do make comments now on that issue as well.
Yeah, we need to be able to make some comments though, like the National Environmental Policy Act document that we can review and understand the ramifications of one route versus another, or even understand where these communities along the way have any meaningful You acknowledge that you talk to the facility operators, a lot of people along the way, and there are tribes along the way. The whole spending consulted with tribes at Hanford or along these routes, that is also a concern for us.
But, the gist of the comment is that an end of year, decision point is too early to accommodate those processes. So I think a comment that says just that is appropriate. That would be one. Thank you.
Okay, we're gonna move to, additional first round comments here in the room. We don't have any, we have some follow-up questions online, but, can we move the mic? I know that we're still talking with folks. Go move the mic back. Yeah. Oh.
So, am I going to sit here or stand?
Yeah.
Okay. Am I audible? Well, I have to peek around the owl to see the folks at the front of the table. Jerry Paulette with Heart of America Northwest. Thank you. First, I want to share the utter disappointment that we're not having a meeting tonight in Seattle where we would have had far more people. And we had people who spent 2.5 hours in traffic to get down here to Olympia for about 12 members of the public to be here. Half of whom or more are from Seattle. That's unacceptable. That is not a meaningful commitment to public involvement. And I have to say, it's really shameful for the state not to be much more forceful in advocating for public meetings in the state's largest cities. And especially when you know that one of the major questions here in this agreement is about trucking liquid radioactive waste through the heart of downtown Spokane. And the irony is added to this that, as Andy knows, and Mark, the state of Washington joined Riverkeeper, Heart of America Northwest, and others 2 decades ago in legal challenges when the Energy Department wanted to ship waste to Hanford for not doing a route-specific analysis that included going through Spokane and Portland. Doesn't matter which direction the waste is going. The risk is the same. And the public's right to comment and be heard is all the more important when you're going to be putting liquid waste potentially on the highway through downtown Spokane. And it's not just the risk of a spill and the risk level of the low activity waste and the chemical waste. It's the risk to the entire economy from the headline, Hanford high-level liquid nuclear waste tank waste spills in a truck accident heading down the hill into downtown Spokane. And the State Department of Ecology has a duty under SEPA that you don't seem to keep talking about the Energy Department's duty. My question is, where is the state of Washington's taking responsibility under the State Environmental Policy Act, which, unlike the US DOE's duty under NEPA, the state duty includes mitigating risks under our state law. The Energy Department has no such duty under NEPA. They can choose the worst possible environmental risk based on their business case analysis. And as long as they analyzed it, they can do it under NEPA. But the state of Washington has a stricter standard and a higher obligation to its public of ensuring that risks are mitigated. And it's pretty obvious. The risk and the Department of Energy's own prior analyses that the state has participated in and fought for show that moving a solid waste is far safer. So would you please respond to when the state is going to do its SEPA analysis and how you will ensure that the people of Spokane are also engaged and have meetings rather than leaving it up to the Energy Department?
So, Jerry, I'm not going to debate the fine points of SEPA. I have disagreement on some of the characterizations and in legal terms from your perspective. Right now, there is not a decision triggering SEPA in front of the Department of College. There's a decision for energy to make. And then to the extent that energy needs to have permitting from the state of Washington to implement its decision, that's when SEPA will kick in. So, I also know as a lawyer that the state can only trigger SEPA and exercise substantive authority if it in its discretion decides to do that. I would note that SEPA does not create a duty. It's a discretionary decision to exercise substantive authority. But that only comes when the actual statute is triggered to apply. So when the time comes, SEPA will be compliant with that.
So does the state commit that you will do if they do not look at mitigation, will you do your own analysis and look at mitigation when permitting has to happen?
Well, Jerry, I'm not going to comment on what the client is going to do. I mean, that's.
Okay, well, then we should turn to the client because I have to say, it's this ecology's responsibility to answer, not the attorney. Same with energy. And I appreciate that two of you have offered very clear responses for the public, but it is the duty of the agencies to answer.
Oh, I'm not a SEPA expert, but following along with what Andy said, when ecology has decisions that we issue, such as if the Department of Energy decides to pursue an on-site gravel plant for the 22 tanks, they would need a permit from us, and that permit would need to have SEPA accompany that decision. And at that point, we would then look at what Department of Energy has done underneath by the SEPA satisfies any of our obligations under SEPA. And if not, we may need to do additional environmental analysis ourselves.
Thank you. I mean, it would be good to incorporate that into the presentation because everything last night and tonight was only about the energy department's doing NEPA analysis, nothing about SEPA. And of course, energy will not want to go to Spokane. We know that. It's put words in your mouths, but you haven't been willing to go to Spokane for public meetings for ages. But ecology does have an obligation to ensure that the people of Spokane have a forum. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I know that we have, I think we're in follow-up territory unless there are any other first round. Oh, we've got one, and yeah. Go right ahead here. We'll have you come up. Sad issues.
Okay, this is uncomfortable, but okay. So looking at the agreement, the milestones, the schedule of waste disposal, you're kind of betting everything on the high level waste vitrification plant being in operation in 2033. But if we're being realistic, I mean, the history of that facility is just delays. So if we're looking at history and being realistic, the plant won't be in operation by 2033, and there's no plan for what will be done in that event. I know in yesterday's meeting, you said that you hope to renegotiate if you didn't think the high-level waste vitrification plant, I believe Ecology said this, if you didn't think the high-level waste vitrification plant was on schedule. So my question is, where in the agreement is there that requirement that you renegotiate? Or really any plan B that you can enforce? Where in the agreement is there any requirement that you renegotiate or any sort of plan B that you can enforce?
Thanks.
Well, under the tri-party. All right, I'm trying to make this work. Under the tri-party agreement or the consent decree, I mean, either party can basically, request that amendment to the agreement. So here we're talking about the consent decree specifically, and there is a process where, say if the state decides that there needs to be some difference in approach, you can propose an amendment to energy. We go negotiate. If we don't reach resolution, we have a dispute resolution provision that allows us to go to the court and request a change to the decree. I mean, that's sort of the most drastic way of approaching a problem under the consent decree. So there's an existing mechanism that was in place until it was signed by the judge in 2010.
Right.
I will note it's just, I guess, it's a sort of a factual matter. I mean, but the problem has been throughout the last, 10 years at least, has been the pretreatment facility. So I have some, it's probably dangerous for me to say this as the lawyer, but it seems like there's a safer bet at the high level waste facility than, the pretreatment facility.
And the only other thing I would say is to the extent that you're interested, for example, learning more about what the various ways of treating high level waste might look like. I don't want to call it like a plan B or plan C or anything like that. The high level waste analysis alternatives document that I mentioned did exactly that. It looked at 18, 19 different ways of accomplishing the high level waste treatment mission, which includes different ways of using the pretreatment facility that Andy was talking about, using the direct feed approach, and what the respective costs of that would be, what is the schedule associated with those various alternatives. So the document that kind of at least assesses the various ways of accomplishing the mission. How to waste your.
And I can't pass up the opportunity. That wasn't to drop the mic. Okay. So if you look at the history of the waste treatment plant, it's not very good. And there's lots of reasons for that, and that, I can get mad every day thinking about some of the decisions made back in history about a one of a kind first of a kind plant built as a design build with a proven technology was not going to go well. That decision was made in the late 90s, and we lived with that for 20 years. And the elements of the impact to the site culture, the team dynamic, the contractual relationships, we've worked over the last 6 years to unravel. And the good news is we have a low activity waste facility that's operating, going through commissioning today. And we're taking the lessons we've used to create that outcome and plow those into our planning for the high level waste facility. Vitrification is not a new thing. So but vitrification on the size and scale that we're executing at the low activity waste facility that we're on a good trajectory to deliver next year. We're committed to do that. The project planning and the lessons learned and the team dynamic and the partnership and the approach overall to finish the design and get 90% design, which is our intention by 27 before we start constructing again, mitigates a number of the risks and frankly the realities that occurred in the waste treatment plant project up to 5 or 6 years ago. So the team that's building the waste treatment plant at the high waste facility, the construction manager worked at the low activity waste facility. The team members that have done some of the design work at law, on the low activity side, are doing the design work on the high waste side. And actually, we borrow them back routinely on law when we have issues to overcome during commissioning. So from a programmatic, a project, and a enterprise perspective, we are committed not to relive the challenges of the past, and we're using every opportunity to learn and grow and strengthen the partnership. That's not only in terms of the Department of Energy and our contractor partnerships, but also our partnerships with ecology, and the regulatory agencies, Department of Health, to make sure that this approach to the Highland Voice facility benefits from all those things we've learned. And that's why I'm optimistic. Likely, I've been here a long time. Likely I won't be here in 2033 when you deliver that plan. But I think it's on the right trajectory. And it'll be up to those that follow me and to kind of continue that culture that is creating the success that we're seeing today. I don't want to push.
Thank you. We started with 5 minutes, we're down to 1. Turning longer with it and giving feedback in this position. Sorry about that. We've got, we're ready for second rounds, and we're going to go online first, and then we'll come back to in-person.
Liz Manson.
Liz Manson, is good. Go ahead.
She's going to unmute.
Yeah, go ahead and mute Liz.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. I have to go find my question. So this is just a follow-up about, if not a timeline of exactly when, just the order of operations that you have to follow in order to get to this 2028 tank retrieval that kicks off the grouting plan for the 22 tanks and the tens of millions of gallons of tank waste. So we talked to EPA, the RCRA folks from EPA, and they were saying that they need to get a petition from Energy to start a treatability variance. And they need the tank chemistry from each individual tank that is being proposed for a retrieval or for the variance. When does the process start to identify which tanks would be targeted for retrievals? Does that start before 2028? Like, does that start this year? Once you identify the tank, do you have to pull a sample and then give EPA that data before you can send in the treatability variance petition? Just if you can just talk through even bigger terms, like first we do this, it would be really helpful. Thanks.
That's what I'm trying now. So I don't know if EPA wants to respond to the part. What I heard was a question about the variance petition and how will we submit it, which is a different question than I think the second part that I heard, and I want to make sure I capture it correctly, which was about how will we pick which tanks, the 22 tank from SSX and U farm, that will be the 22 tanks that are retrieved in accordance with the milestone. So for the latter, we have a milestone that's a part of the package. Attachment L in the settlement agreement package, the holistic agreement package. And the milestone is for April 30th, 2025. For the parties to get back together and talk about that exact question, which is the series of retrieval of the specific tanks. So I don't know that it would be at the level of specific tanks so much as the number of tanks among the 22. So let's hypothetically say this is the first 6 tanks we're going to go to. This will be the next 8 and so forth. So that is a component of that milestone post package. Do you want to say anything about the variance?
Well, I think it's helpful to just say we will be engaged with Department of Energy, but really it's the Department of Energy will be giving us information that will help us determine the best path forward on any particular treatability variance request, schedule, timeline, et cetera. So it is a partnership, but it really starts with what Department of Energy can produce and share with us, and then we can go from there figuring out the path forward.
And in the course of that, I realized that I think I failed to cover one of the bullets on the slide, which was talking about something called system plan, which is a terrible name for an idea that energy and ecology use a common model with assumptions that they can both propose but are common, to do simulations on how to complete the tank waste mission. So for instance, what tanks to retrieve next, in what order, other ways of mixing and matching how you do your order of operations to see what effect, tweaking one parameter has on the outcome of the mission. And this was something that was developed as part of the 2010 settlement with the consent decree to the tri-party agreement element. And originally had the parties doing these system plan runs, but then coming together to negotiate certain things based on those modeling runs every 6 years. And those things included what tanks could be retrieved next in what sequence, whether new double shell tanks are needed or other contingency measures based on developments, looking at the end dates and whether revisions are necessary to those. One of the features of the proposal here is to move up the topics of retrieval sequence negotiation and also contingency measures, looking at double shell tanks or any other contingency measures and whether they are needed to an every 3-year negotiation. And then sticking with every 6 years for the original items, the other ones. So to reset the time frame, the first every 3-year negotiation would be at that April 2025 date that Mark identified. So that would be the point where we'd start saying, okay, of those 22 tanks, what comes first? And then it's a little complicated because we then had to come 2 years later to sort of get things racked on the right sequence. But the next 3-year negotiation is actually 2 years after that, 2027, and then you go on the every 3 years something.
Andy, do you want to speak for a second on the attachment J, the 22 tanks? Because I think Liz might have been asking about the process inside 135. I don't want to assume.
Yeah, so it's going down the rabbit hole a bit, but with those 22 tanks, we've already decided basically what the next 22 tanks are. In a broad chunk. So those every 3-year discussions are going to be identifying what DOE expects to be retrieving next, but we actually get the final identification when DOE submits something called a tank waste retrieval work plan, or in Hanford speak, H-work. So the work plan sets the identification.
Okay, thank you. Back into the room for next round of questions.
I actually have a set of questions, and I'd like to be able to ask all of them because it's especially important to know where these documents that we were provided don't make a lot of sense to the public. And I have questions that are specifically questions that have come up from reading this. So is it okay for me to just kind of list them or something?
Please check the room.
Yeah, like, are there a bunch of other questions or, I mean, I'd be happy to wait if you want to ask your question.
Sorry, I'm getting some feedback here on that. Mia, if you want to ask your follow-up, and then we could let you go on a bit of a little. I don't think we have at this point any other follow-up questions online. And then before we continue, just want to, as promised, check time. We can continue on here. And we've got the room until 8:30. We will have some brief concluding remarks, but why don't we go in that order? Okay, and if there are follow-up questions that come up online, we may interject them, but go that one. Thanks.
Okay, Mia Burke with Hanford Challenge. So Mark, you were talking about A104 and A105 being tricky tanks, with technical challenges of removing the waste. And convening an expert panel to look at new and proposed technologies to better remove that waste. So my question is related to Sea Farm, Waste Management Area C. And, you know, what is the plan for that farm? And I'm wondering if that independent expert panel looking at these new technologies would be able to remove more waste from Sea Farm as well as the two tanks that you've identified.
Yeah, I understand the question. The scope, the intended scope of the experimental is not that perspective of potential technologies to go back into sea farm. Sea farm tanks will retrieve to the requirements of the consent decree. And so when they're looking at this, by the way, it's not just A104, 105, that's two example tanks. Their endeavor is actually broader than that. There are other tanks that we've retrieved recently in AX bar, for example, that have presented other tank retrieval challenges or tank condition issues. So for example, this is what I mentioned last night, but we've run into some tanks that have, which is kind of a wavy bottom. And so when you're using a high pressure washer or a sluicer, for example, which is kind of like a high pressure washer you use in your house, it gets hard to sometimes mobilize the waste around some of the obstacles or some of these hills at the bottom of the tank, if you will. So, you know, these are the types of issues that we're going to be looking at to see whether there are additional technologies that can help us with future retrievals. So the concept is really about retrievals going forwards, not so much going back, for example.
Why not? Why won't you go back? Like, why, because there's quite a lot of waste being left in the Sea Farm tanks, isn't there?
No.
600,000 gallons.
I mean, the tanks were retrieved to require limits of what it to be retrieved to. And then what happens is, oh, you can't hear it? Sorry. Sorry about that. Hello. Thank you. Should I repeat myself? I forgot what I said. You said, is there a lot of waste remaining in those tanks? Yes, the answer is no. Delmore, you can speak to it more specifically, but also, you know, what has happened since we completed the retrievals in Sea Farm is that we then, the infrastructure and everything has to be installed and the next farm to be retrieved. Workforce goes to the next farm to be retrieved. So there's a lot of infrastructure, resources, et cetera, that put in place when we actually are doing physical retrievals in a tank. Delmore, anything you want to say additional about Sea Farm specifically, or just?
Yeah, a good question. And there's kind of two aspects of that. Okay, is that better? Yeah, two aspects. How's that better? Okay, thanks. This is really close. Two aspects of that. So, you know, in Sea Farm, we went in, we retrieved to the requirements to complete the retrievals. The tanks will go into the closure process, and in that process, under RIPRA, we'll reevaluate the residuals in those tanks. We'll go through risk evaluations, both under RIPRA and DEW's regulations, and reevaluate if any additional removal activities are required. And in the near term, as Mark said, these technologies really are moving forward. And part of this is, as Brian mentioned, just kind of a risk perspective in terms of when we have aging tanks going in and removing as much material out of them as we can, which is why we're going SX and U. In the near term, get as much material out of those tanks really allows us to address more risk quicker. But the residuals in the tank will be evaluated in the closure processes under RIPRA. And as those move through and basically throughout the life cycle, because we will continue to invest time and energy to look at technologies. We were already looking at technology, looking at ways to do it more efficient, get more waste out, to do it with less exposure to the workforce, do it safer and faster. So that'll be an ongoing activity. And 20, 30, 40 years from now, we're in the final closures. And RIPRA answered the process of both. Have you go back and reevaluate technology maturation? What has changed in that time? And ask that basic question. Could we do better? And will it make a material difference in the long-term protection of these properties?
Okay, Have to check. Okay, Helen, before you go, Liz, you had a question, clarifying question online. Have the 22 tanks already been identified? And Mark, I believe in your previous response, you said, yes, they have already been identified.
Not specifically,
Okay,
but to the extent I think it's very was that we have identified that they will come from on SX and Q farms. So there's more than 22 tanks in those farms, 43. So it's 22 tanks from among the SX and Q farms, which are 3 separate single shell tank farms that they have site. So that's to the specific 22 tanks. That's what the parties are going to get back together and talk about and put a finer point on the specific number of tanks to be retrieved on that 3-year cycle that Andy was talking about.
okay, thanks for the clarification. Ellen, I think this mic will work. So if you want to utilize this for.
Not the owl, but the mic. I'm happy
Can
with
folks in the
whatever.
room here?
Yeah,
Okay,
whatever's most useful.
okay, go ahead.
Okay, well, the first question I have is probably just takes one word answer. So I'll ask the simplest one. I don't know where it is in here at this point, but the frequency of river protection project system plan negotiations will change, I think it says. Does that mean more often or less often?
Yeah, that's the every 3-year cycle I was just talking about, so more often. For 2 topics, like what tanks are being retrieved next, and are there contingency measures needed, such as additional tank capacity, that'll be discussed every 3 years.
Okay, well, that's nice to know. Okay, and then another really simple question. And it's not quite germane to what most of the discussion has been, but the new tank capacity. I mean, you all know that lots of people have been asking for new tank capacity for a really long time, and that, this is a great thing. What a lot of people have been asking for that new tank capacity for has been a lot of concern about the potential for catastrophic failure. Is that, it's not clear from this whether that is one of the reasons why that new tank capacity is being created, and will it work for that if necessary?
I mean, the intent behind the 1 million gallons of new multi-purpose storage capacity is to provide overall operational flexibility. So I don't think it's one specific reason or another. It's within the entirety of sort of the tank system overall. Our perspective is the best way to make space in that double shell tank system right now is to continue full steam ahead on treatment, which will take the waste out of the double shell tank system and immobilize it. So that's the primary way to provide operational flexibility from the department's perspective. But the 1 million gallons will provide additional operational flexibility for within the tank system overall.
So in other words, we can rest a little bit easier with this new capacity as far as this very long-standing concern about potential for catastrophic failure.
I'll break down all that.
Thanks. I think the key is, that the bulk of the space that we're going to make is for treatment. DF law, which is their operations, will be creating a new DST, once you get up and running. And that's really going to give flexibility. We maintain emergency space, 1 million gallons of emergency space, all the time to deal with unknowns and upset conditions. Having additional space, really what it's going to do for the mission is give us the operational flexibility, allow us to move things around so we can process the waste through the system quicker, especially in the west area, because that's where we only have 3 double shell tanks. And if we had an issue with those tanks, in the east area, there's a lot more double shell tanks, and as we get the retrieval processes going, we will have plenty of space there to manage operations and deal with changing conditions.
So that, in other words, looking at this sort of from a practical perspective, then really it's just the speed with which the process can move forward still is what we're counting on and.
In part,
Yeah.
I would say the other piece that we count on significantly is a robust tank integrity program. So we have a comprehensive program that assesses the stability of the tanks, whether a tank is leaking and so forth. So that program is in place, remains in place, which in part addresses the concern that you're talking about.
And then a related question to that is in terms of the criteria that are used for making the selection of which tanks to go after first, how much are those criteria like, are you thinking about the need to get at tanks that are more of a risk for current leaking and how you're going to clean up underneath the tanks? Like, how does that figure into the decision-making process?
I want to make sure I answer the right question. It's really about how are we going to pick which tanks we're going to go to among the 22 tanks that we're going to pick from SSX and U.
Yeah, and is that, I guess, and sort of more nuanced, is that mostly about from a technical perspective of what's most efficient to go after versus the environmental risk?
Yeah, good question. So for SXNU, a couple reasons. Overall, why we're focusing on those tanks is a very large percentage of all the radioactive material that remains in our single shell tanks are specifically in those farms. So over 40% of all the radioactivity in the single shell tanks is in those 3 farms. So that's one reason we're focusing on those 3 farms. The other aspect of it is, as we mentioned before, these tanks have a mixture of waste materials in them. They have sludges, salt-like material, and the sludges are really have a high radioactive content and are part of the high waste feed. So those will be separated out and maintained in our SY farm, which we only have the 3 double shell tanks, and they'll wait there to go to the high waste facility. So part of the art of selecting which tanks we do is to get as many done as we can, to get as much of the radioactivity into our safety double shell tanks, but not use all the SY farm space until we get high level waste up and running. And then when high level waste up and running, we use that cross-site sludge line to move that high level waste over to the high level waste vitrification plant. So a lot of it in the selecting of the individual tanks is to get as much out of the tanks as we can without putting too much of the high level waste in our DSTs to SY farm. So that's how it'll be selected, to get as many as we can, but manage space in the western.
And if I'm reading this right, these are, what are the decisions that are going to be made basically by the end of the year, it looks like, in terms of that? Like, how can you not have a real pretty good sense of which tanks you're going to target if it's so close to making that decision?
So for the review of these tanks, there isn't a decision at the end of the year. As we're talking about in the system planning process, I think it's next year, we will identify all the tanks we'll do after we commit to the consent decree. So first off, we're going to finish the consent decree tanks, which are AX, and which is done, and A farm. That'll get us through 2028. And these will be tanks after that. So we'll, before that time, agree to 3 years, and then a year later, 3 more years. So we'll be basically planning 6 years in front of us. And then every 3 years, adding another 3 years at the end of it. We'll have 6 years planned out and agreed to, and then we'll submit the TWRPs, which is the document that gives for us permission to retrieve these tanks. So that's how that sequence will work, and we'll keep moving forward and try to maximize the tanks that we retrieve in that window.
Okay, and then here's, sorry, that's, I sort of need to be able to ask follow-up questions. So, because I'm just trying to, like Liz referred to, the order of operations is kind of hard to wrap your head around if you're not living with it every single day. So apologies for that. But so is there a deadline, or is there any timeline? So you have like a technology evaluation document. assessing new technologies as part of this. There doesn't appear to be any kind of timeline for when the assessment needs to be done that I can see from this, from what I have in front of me. How does that feed into the decision-making process that we were just talking about? And when does that feed in there? Like, is there a good idea about when this is going to be done?
Yes, at least in part for the retrieval technology evaluation. So we have sort of two components to it. One is to develop a work plan for ecology, which will identify sort of how we're going to undertake the evaluation, as well as the convening of the expert panel that was mentioned. And so there is a milestone package in the agreement. I'd like to have a full copy of that. Attachment I discusses the details of the retrieval technology evaluation. That first milestone that's associated with the submission of the retrieval technology work plan that I mentioned is March 30th, 2025.
Okay, what would the milestone be? Like, what does that mean? That you
That's
need
the
the,
date submit to ecology the retrieval technology work plan for the evaluation that we're going to undertake with respect to the technologies.
I don't really understand what that means. So are you gonna have an like, are you talking about the process to do the assessment or about having this? So we're just talking about getting started with the process to do the assessment. Yeah.
The work plan is supposed to set out a schedule for convening the panel and completing the activities, and it's approval by ecology, meaning that the schedule that is enforceable as part of the milestone. So, so we're waiting for DOE's proposal on sort of that timeline, but then we approve it, and then it becomes basically part of the tri-party agreement at that point. Then we move on to the testing and development process. And you're right in that it's you know, it's a little open-ended at this point. Part of that is because we don't know exactly what is going to be tested or developed, right? So, I mean, it's a little bit of an adaptive process, but kind of the bookmark on the whole thing, and this is, I think, beyond my expectation of when I hope it would be done, but 2040 is the date for completing retrieval of 8104 and 8105. And the intent is that this new technology effort will receive that so that we, you know, can basically judge whether there's anything for those tanks. And, you know, that's, I think, you know, different professionals have different opinions on whether anything can be done with those tanks, but, you know, part of, I think, the hope on the state side is that we may find some solutions there.
And then finally, just another question, like, I just don't understand. The section on alternative treatment, which is all, the whole thing is very open-ended. It feels like, I just frankly don't even understand bullet number 3. I don't understand. It says offsite disposal conditions will remain in place at least through 2040. I don't know what that means. I don't know what offsite disposal conditions means. And I don't understand how it relates. Like, from what the way I'm understanding this, bullet 1 is saying that it hasn't been decided how and where grouting will occur before offsite disposal. And then bullet 2 seems to be saying it's not clear where it's going to go, except that it's going to go outside of Washington. And you guys seem to know where that is. And that certainly feeds into public concern about what the plans are for moving stuff and in what state, you know, what it's going to be when it's moving. And then number 3, I just don't understand what that means. Like, what are offsite disposal conditions that will remain in place through 2040? And then what are you going to be talking about in 2038 about discussing future conditions? And how does that relate to the first two bullets?
So I'll do my best to take a stab at it. So first, let's talk about what the conditions are that attach to the alternative treatment. And the term alternative treatment is because it's treating tank waste, but not involving the waste treatment plant. So it's an alternative to the waste treatment plant. So one condition, I mean, first, the state had concern about disposal of grounded low activity waste at Hanford. And it's based on Hanford's geology and the amount of waste already being disposed of there and a lot of it that's already in an existing EIS. So, so the stipulations are, number one, that the grounded low activity waste is disposed of off the Hanford site. Number two, it cannot be disposed of at the Hanford site. And that's, you know, basically if something happens that includes the offsite disposal, we're saying it still can't be disposed of at Hanford. And then number three, and Mark touched on this in the slides, this idea of, we've been calling it just-in-time production, where you're not creating a backlog of waste, that then if something goes wrong with your disposal plant, you've got all the stuff sitting in Hanford. So those are the conditions that attach. Those conditions attach full stop for any low activity waste through 2040. Not tied to waste just from 22 tanks, from any, you know, it could be from any of those 43 tanks, right? The continuation language is to account for the fact that if we know at least 22 tanks will be retrieved. So if the low activity waste from those 22 tanks has still not been treated by 2040, the conditions continue until that treatment occurs. And that's to not create an incentive to not treat the waste and wait until 2040 occurs, if that makes sense. In our negotiation, we agreed on these conditions up to a certain point in time, which is, you know, 15, 16 years in the future. And there was, I think fair to say, discomfort in our group. I'm using a royal we about agreeing to limitations beyond that point. So we agreed in 2038, let's revisit and see where we're at and see whether any conditions will attach moving forward from 2040. And in my understanding, there's a question about whether a ground approach would still be needed beyond 2040. So there are a lot of questions that, you know, we really can't answer with clarity right now. And I would hope that I won't be around negotiating this in 2038, but our, you know, successors will have better information and be able to make good decisions.
Thank you. I've got a follow-up here and then, I'm sorry, I've got a first round question online and then a follow-up in the room and another follow-up online. So can everyone hear me? I'm not using a microphone. I think it's better given the feedback. So yeah, we're gonna go ahead and read the question off. See if that works.
All right, so I'm not sure if you can hear me. This is from Dan Solins. His question is, what is the limiting factor and how many tanks can be retrieved at once besides budget? So yeah, what's the limiting factor besides the budget?
Yeah. I think the short answer is equipment and people. Probably be the quickest answer. It takes an immense amount of infrastructure, equipment, and specialized workforce to go in and do the work. And obviously, you know, of utmost importance is the safety of that workforce. So we do things carefully, we do things methodically, and as quickly and as safely as possible. But that's the comparative.
Okay. Lincoln?
Yeah. All right. My name is Lincoln, for anyone on the chat. So yesterday I pointed out that your history slide there fails to include that the site was home to many indigenous tribes for thousands of years before being taken over by the Manhattan Project and barring those indigenous tribes from returning. So I just want to point out that the slide is erasing thousands of years of history, and all of a sudden this site started at the Manhattan Project. Because those people's lives and their traditions still continue today. They continued while the Manhattan Project was going. They continued 1,000 years before it. So I just want to reiterate that. These proposed changes will continue to have adverse effects on their cultural resources and the tribes who have treaty rights at Hanford. Yesterday, when I asked you why the tribes were not part of the holistic negotiation, Mark, you responded by teaching me that tri means three, and that there were three parties that were a part of it. Thank you. Well, I want to know why the indigenous tribes were not a part of that initial tri-party. Why were there not 4? Why were there not 5? There are many nations that are involved and have treated rights. So, because I don't want you to evade that question again, I would like to direct my question to ecology, since you said that you have been following the procedures to talk with the tribes and that you have been doing government to government consultation. So please tell me, how do these changes affect the treaty rights of the tribe and affect their cultural resources? Because if you have been consulting with them, you should be able to answer that question for me.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. So I think Mark referenced this yesterday, but we issued or sent as priorities letters to the 3 federally recognized tribes offering consultation.
At what point?
Where we started the negotiation.
Before 4 years ago.
No, so I'm sorry, not before we started the negotiation, before we put out the holistic agreement. We sent those letters as tri-parties, and I'm not sure.
So you didn't invite them as part of the 4 years?
They were not part of the 4 years confidential mediated discussions that we had. And as for treaty rights, the resources, I can't speak to that. I will say that we heard from one of the tribes, and I think Mark spoke to this yesterday. We heard from one of the tribes, the Yakama Nation, they're interested in having formal government consultation with us, so we're trying to get that scheduled.
But it's not an interested thing, it's your responsibility. In the environmental justice laid out by multiple executive orders, by the NEPA guidance, you are supposed to consult with those tribes at the earliest time that you can. And saying that you don't know how this is affecting their treaty rights, how it's not affecting their cultural resources, when you already have this public comment period going, you've already made these decisions, is an insult to those tribes. And it's disappointing that you, representing the Department of Ecology, cannot tell us what this effect is going to be. Thank you.
Okay, we're gonna move on to the next question. We need the mic for that. Oh, so we've got
issues with that.
Yeah.
Turning it on.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Yes.
All right, so I guess another place that, that an analysis of the impacts to affected peoples, including the tribes, can be seen in both the tourist EIS and the tank closure waste management EIS. And in both of those, they looked at affected in different tribal usages and different usages of resources. And so many of the alternatives that we're talking about today, not all of them, but many of them are analyzed in both of those environmental impact statements and specifically to the impacts of various specific tribal uses. So they're in those documents. And
when were those documents prepared?
The Tour CIS was prepared and finalized in 1997. The tank closure waste management EIS was finalized in 2012, but is specifically about many of the alternatives that we're talking about.
Thank you. Okay, we're gonna move on to a follow-up online here. And it looks like we have a second follow-up online as well.
Yes,
is
and then Liz. Yes, Liz, go ahead and, ask your follow-up question.
Yeah, I just wanted to get the numbers stated of how many gallons are left in the sea farm tanks. I think it's around, we were trying to look it up, around, is it true that it's around 62,000 gallons left in sea farm tanks? And that it's unevenly distributed, so some tanks have more waste than others, so it's not like an even distribution. Just so that we're not saying it's not that much, but just to say how much it is.
Hey Liz, this is Suzanne. I looked it up while you guys brought it up, and my rough math is there's about 39,000 across Sea Farm left in the bottom of Sea Farm after the retrieval. If you retrieve the tanks to the 1%, which is outlined in the tri-party agreement, which in a big tank is equal to 360 cubic feet, which is about 2,600 gallons, you would be at 32,000, 31,000. So because some of those tanks could not be retrieved all the way down to the 1%, to the 360 cubic feet, you have 39,000 versus 31,000 left in that tank farm. And that's rough math because some of the tanks are smaller, 4 of them are smaller.
Okay, one more question, follow-up online.
Yes, we have, one final question, second question from Grace Lewis. Grace, are you still on the line?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Great. I just want to first state that I'm extremely understanding of the complexities of hosting a remote event for the public and that technical difficulties are not within your control. However, I believe that myself and many who joined tonight remotely found this meeting immensely difficult to hear, and it seems nearly impossible to provide an informed comment when only about 50% of the presentation and discussion were reasonably audible. So I'm joining tonight from Seattle, and I think this supports a very fair point that's been brought up this evening and yesterday evening, that the agencies have failed to make these meetings accessible to the public, especially in major metropolitan areas like Seattle, Spokane, and Portland. State and local agencies are directed to encourage public involvement on decisions like this. So my question is, what options are there for those of us who joined this evening remotely and now will struggle to effectively be involved in providing comments? Will we be provided with a remedy for this, or are we just going to be told to log on tomorrow night?
Hi there, Jen Colborn with DOE Public Affairs. Can you guys hear me okay without a mic? I don't think at this point we have an answer for that. I think we need to talk with management, look at a lot of, scenarios. We hear you. I'm really sorry about the audio tonight. But yeah, I think that we just need to reconvene and then we will get back to you all. So thank you.
Are there any final follow-up questions from the room before we wrap up? We'll have some closing remarks. Yeah.
Dan Sears again, Columbia River Keeper. The forbearance part, I just say by way of introduction, I think from our perspective, forbearance isn't enough. The Department of Energy, we think that the use of the interpretive rule is flatly inappropriate at Hanford. It's positioned in the state of Washington when it stood up to challenge it. And so I guess I would put the question to DOE, why don't you just drop it? Just forget about using it at Hanford. Don't just forbear it. Say we will not do this at Hanford going forward because it's not going to be acceptable to the state or to the communities that are impacted by Hanford. I have a follow-up question.
Well, what you're describing is beyond the extent of what was negotiated between the parties.
I mean, if you could negotiate to forbear, why can't you negotiate just to say, we're not gonna do it?
Well, there's a careful nuance that Andy spoke about last night, which is that I think all of the respective agencies that were negotiated were careful to not, I forget how you described it last night, but essentially make any definitive concessions about their respective authorities when there are differences of perspective and opinions and legal decisions, even between the members that were in the respective negotiations. So what we came up with, and I think, you know, what's interesting about the agreement is that we found a way to accomplish or pursue the proposed alternative treatment, for example, without use of the high level waste interpretation. So, you know, this agreement includes the forbearance provision, but it also sets us on a path to continue to explore alternative treatment technologies, the 22 tanks, for example, and avoid litigation, protracted litigation or dispute once we even see about the high level waste interpretation itself. So it's sort of like one of the intended beauties of the proposed agreement.
But forbearance means just not for now. Refrain for now. And so at some point, if you decide to go to DOE decides to go back and use the interpretive rule, what does the process look like then? And I guess that will go to the state as well.
So one of the other, oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
The settlement agreement and the language of the forbearance provision includes expressly that if there's a change in condition where DOE would decide to apply the high level misinterpretation in Hanford, that we would have to get back together with the state to talk about if we were going to do that. So essentially requires us to get back and talk about if there's a change.
To effectively inform them that you're going to use the interpretive rule.
If that was the case, but again, it's
I guess what I'm trying to get at is, you know, there's not a lot of confidence from the public that forbearance is enough. So thank you for hearing that, doing your best to answer the question. I guess for the state, you know, how forbearance is what it is. It just stops there. What is the process going to be like for you if they come back and say, okay, new rules, something changed, you know, what is that actually? How would the public be involved? How would you engage? I know it's a big question, but do you have a sense for that? I mean, is that kind of
You're right, it's a big question. I'm not sure I can answer, you know, what the state decision makers would do in terms of public engagement. The last part of the forbearance provision, however, does recognize that, you know, DOE changes its mind, the parties, you know, acknowledge that the state would be in the position then of challenging the interpretation.
Okay.
And we tried to put terms in there that didn't prejudice our ability to do that, and feel like we did that. And so there's basically notice that there could be litigation that's happening potentially.
Okay. I just want to say by way of closing, thank you for everyone who spent good chunk of your lives working on this. As people who in our communities along the Columbia River rely on the work from your agencies, and particularly from the workers out there who risk their lives every day to protect the Columbia River. And for the record, I know it's not comments today, but we appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, thanks. And I just want to acknowledge that, you know, I think what the people involved, and I'll speak really for my sense coming out of 4 years of 100 mediation sessions, is that everyone was there in good faith, trying to do the right thing to move Hanford, you know, forward. And there are a lot of competing interests and a lot of legitimate competing interests in Hanford. But the alternative to moving forward with cleanup actions is nothing happening, and I don't think that that's a better alternative.
Okay, final question. We're almost at time here. Go ahead, Jerry.
Thanks. And thank you all for bearing rather than forbearing and taking more questions and being here till 8:30. Despite the small audience here, you probably thought, oh, I'm going to get out here earlier and eat something. at a reasonable hour tonight. So thank you for staying for questions. And also I want to say on behalf of Park American Northwest, as I said last night again, that I think there are some really historic positives in this agreement, including the recognition that you can't dispose of all the tank waste at Hanford without contaminating the groundwater for thousands of years. One of the things that came out tonight from having the dialogue 2 nights in a row that I'm scratching my head over is about the 22 tanks. I find it hard to believe that I missed in the materials that you had already identified SSX and U tank farms as being the source of that. And we've been reviewing it from the context of prior discussions about whether or not there was still going to be an evaluation of moving up the retrieval of the T tank farm where tank T111 is leaking at an astonishingly fast rate in terms of the liquid loss shown in the data monitoring system month to month. And so as I've looked at the agreement to date, I've been under the impression that the evaluation, including under the system plan, for speeding up retrieval of the tank farm to get to the leaking tank T111 was part of the evaluation process. But now I'm scratching my head and going, it sounds like you've taken off the table retrieval of the T tank farm with a tank that could be leaking well over 6,000 gallons a year and has been leaking that at that rate probably since 2011 or 2012 time period. So did I miss something? Have you taken off the table evaluating speeding up retrieval of the T tank farm? Was that in the documents that specified SSX and U that we missed?
So what has not been taken off the table is the retrieval of the T farm. The holistic agreement does identify that the 22 tanks retrieved by 2040 would come on SSX and U farm. And separately, we have the requirement within the agreed order to do practicability evaluation for accelerating potentially the timeline for retrieval of T109 and T111, if that practicability evaluation is still underway. So they're not correctly, that practicability evaluation comes from the agreed order, not from the listed agreement, but we're still doing that evaluation, and that will be delivered to ecology. It has been delivered to ecology, so
See, Andy wants to.
And what you will also see in the milestone for the 22 tanks is language that Energy included that lets it be known that if say the state require an advancement of retrieval under that agreed order process, it may have difficulty completing the 22 tank retrievals by 2040. I mean, there's a bridge there, I guess, between the proposals we're talking about today and that order that was there last year.
I did see language and read it in the other direction that their substitutions essentially could defer doing all 22. Other tanks might count for the 22, but I would urge you to look at language that melds the two together. It's, obviously I'm a rather highly involved stakeholder with you on the question of evaluating leaking tanks and what should be done. And if, for me, I can't look at it and say how the two documents relate. And I have to say, it gives me grave concern, given our past agreement, that identifying 22 in the SSX and U tank farms may preclude, as a matter of practicality, doing the retrieval of a tank that is leaking. And that would be very disconcerting if, based on some other factors, you say, we'll let the tank keep leaking as it has been since well over a decade. So I'd urge a merging of the two and cross-referencing and making that very clear. Thank you.
Thank you. We're at 8:30, just a little past. We have a few closing comments that we want to make. Just a couple of reminders about comment period that we've been discussing throughout the evening. Closing September 1st. There's a link on the Hanford.gov website on their events page where you can make those public comments. This discussion this evening is not part of that formal record. But these meetings are being recorded for your reference. We have an additional meeting, of course, tomorrow in the river with a hybrid option. And we have heard some feedback already about this meeting, and we encourage additional comments through the meeting evaluation form. We've got a link to that if you'd like to provide us with more feedback there. And so with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over for concluding remarks. We're going to start with Tim Hamlin, to Stephanie, and then to Brian Pitts as well.
Yeah, in light of the hour, we could very brief. Thank you, everyone, for coming. You gave us a lot to think about. Those were really good questions. We hear your concerns. We hear your concerns about the agreement. We hear your concerns about where we're having public meetings. We hear your concerns about how to meet tonight. The larger concerns about who was in the room when we were working out this agreement. Those all registered. So I just want to acknowledge that I appreciate you being here and I appreciate what you shared, and we are listening. You gave us a few things to think about. Obviously, we're going to go do some thinking on what we heard. So for anyone who can come tomorrow night, for those who are online, please take advantage of that opportunity, because we really don't know exactly where we're going from here on our public engagement part.
Thanks, Tim. I'll echo a lot of what Tim said. You know, we really appreciate the feedback that we heard today, especially around locations for public meetings. I'm really, as I'm sure Brian and Tim are both feeling, sorry to hear that, you know, you only heard about 50% of what was said today. That's definitely disheartening. So I hope we're able to approve the connection tomorrow. And I know Brian, Tim, and I will be having a conversation around how we move forward with public engagement from here on out. So really just appreciate the time. And I also want to acknowledge, I think, Jerry, you said that you have some folks that traveled over 2 hours in traffic to be here. And we really appreciate you taking the time to join us through traffic. We ourselves came up from the Tri-Cities, and we're thankful that we didn't hit traffic on I-5 getting up here. So we know that that can be a challenge. So we appreciate that feedback. In general, though, I hope you got some out of our responses to your questions. You asked some really good questions. I hope that our answers informed how you will comment and provide us comments. And hopefully, if you want to, we'll be having another public comment tomorrow at Mid River. And hopefully virtually, we'll have things worked out and it'll be more effective for you to join that way if you're not able to travel down there with us. Thank you again for taking the time to join us this evening. Really appreciate it. I'll turn it over to Brian.
Thanks, Stephanie. I appreciate the discussions tonight. I think the underpinning reality is, and I think you all recognize it, we see it every day. Hanford's complex. And if we had unlimited funding, we would do everything we could to accelerate the mission, but we don't have unlimited funding. We don't have unlimited equipment. We don't have unlimited technologies. And we don't have unlimited people to execute the mission. And so the challenge that the department wrestles with on a daily basis is, how do we optimize the risk reduction per dollar that we apply to the site across not only the tank waste mission, which is only one of our product lines, but also the remediation activities that we do, the infrastructure that enables the cleanup activities to occur, water, power, sewer, roads, IT, all of those all combined. And while we get tremendous support from Senator Murray and Senator Cameron, Congressman Newhouse, and we have demonstrated our ability to be, or the capacity to be investment worthy of congressional members to support the mission. It's a big mission and there's lots going on. So when we make the decisions we make, often it's based on optimizing the risk profile to our workers first. And then protecting the community as we clean up the environment. Because when we sub-optimize the investment in the priorities we place on the site and what we clean up, time marches on. And those things that we pass on are going to be harder and more dangerous in the future. And those are the hard decisions that we have to make on almost a daily basis. Because at the core of what we do, we have to protect the people that execute this mission and do it professionally, do it effectively almost every day. So it is complex, it is a challenge. The feedback is helpful. All perspectives are important, but generally we're never going to satisfy everyone because we simply can't to progress the mission. And it's Andy said, the easiest solution is do nothing. But that's the wrong solution. And that's why we have to make these hard decisions. We continue to work with everyone we can, regulators, stakeholders, tribal agents, do the best we can because the hazards we manage are very, very real. And we have an obligation as a federal department to move those in a constructive direction every day. It'll never be fast, but that's the reality of what we have to do. And so these comments are helpful. I always learn a lot in these exchanges, both on where areas where we are communicating well and where we're not. And we'll continue to do our very best. And I commit to you that we have a dedicated team of professionals with the department, the contractors, the regulatory partners to move this very complex mission forward on a daily basis. And we'll continue to do the best we can. And we'll continue to do that in a way that is timely, transparent, and engaging to create the best outcome we can in a very complex world. So I do appreciate the time tonight. I hope that those that can will plug in the Twitter tomorrow for the third installment. And the public comments that you make are important and we will consider those. So please make sure that you do that and hopefully the sessions help in ways that will be constructive for that. So thank you all for your time.
Thanks, everyone. We're moving to wrap up the meeting. Appreciate your participation and time.